But Cled and Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. When Kenneth Polite announced his resignation last week, he did not know it would be sooner than he thought. As part of a Trump administration nationwide purge of U.S. attorneys. We'll look tonight at crime fighting on the national and local level, including a crime spike in Jefferson Parish. We'll also examine a slowdown in riverfront development, what to expect from real estate prices. State cost cutters look for ideas and a change in strategy for protecting Bourbon Street. We begin, though, with the latest news in the Mike Yenny recall effort. On the beat for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Gordon Russell, managing editor for investigations, The New Orleans Advocate. Kurt Sprang, news anchor, WGNO-TV Channel 26. And Richard Thompson, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go over to Errol first for the news that broke today regarding the Mike Yenny recall effort.
Yeah, the people who were behind the effort announced that they were going to stop their effort. They still had 2 weeks left, but they said that they're not going to get to that point. By law, they were required to get 90,000 signatures, which is 1/3 of the registered voters in Jefferson Parish. That's a hard thing to do when your number is based on registered voters, because there are a lot of registered voters anywhere who really aren't regular voters, who might not be voters at all, but yet you're using those numbers at all. And so people say, you know, it should have been based on 1/3 of the people who voted in the last election, which would be a much smaller number. So it's a major goal that's hard to get. Had a major setback during the elections last fall when they weren't allowed to get within 100 feet of the polls. It's been a difficult, especially the way Jefferson Parish is really sprawled throughout. They don't say how many signatures they did get, but they say it's around half. So you know, if you're saying like around 45,000, that's still a lot of signatures. For Mike Yenny, I don't think this is a high five moment. I mean, I wouldn't, you know, be going to Ruth's Chris tonight and celebrating it, because all it is that because of the laws, they really weren't able to succeed. My instinct, and I think people who watch politics, is that if it would have succeeded and if it would have gone to a vote, that he would have been voted out by a landslide. I mean, I think that the feeling and the sentiment seems to be out there, and so it was more of a technical setback, but one that, you know, may assure that he's going to get to finish out his term. I don't see anything that could stop it unless there's some sort of a legal action that happens. If there's an indictment, even that may not require him to resign. But, you know, what it does bring to mind, though, is the American political system, which is how rigid it is in terms of removing people from office. By contrast, a parliamentary system, which is party-based, is very flexible, that you can have votes of no confidence within your party. You could have elections before a regular election is scheduled, and so it's a lot easier to have turnover. And so part of it is the nature of the system we have, which is based on a presidential thing. Is that better or worse? I don't know, because, you know, it could be sometime that there's a person who's under fire for what's not really a valid reason. Someone's out to get them. But it's just, it's a lot more rigid in the United States, and we're seeing this being acted out right now.
Well, back to the Mike Yenny situation. I mean, this all stemmed from a sexting scandal with a then 17-year-old student.
Right.
And he apologized, and he also said he was not going to step down, that he hasn't, and that he could do the job, which he says he's doing at this point.
And all he admitted to was sending messages, you know, anything else that may have come out. And so he's there. How effectively he could do the job, you just don't know. I mean, here's a man who's banned from all school grounds. You can imagine what it's like when he walks into a council chamber. I mean, he doesn't have a following in Jefferson Parish now, so it's got to be difficult for him to be actually doing his job.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds going forward. Just in that, I think they're trying to put a lot of pressure on him to quit, and now that seems to have failed, and the recall has failed, now they've got, you know, several years still ahead of them, where the council and Mike Gainey have to try to figure out a way to get along, I guess.
He's still new in his term. Now, the way Jefferson Parish government is organized, that the council has a lot of power in relationship to the parish president. So there are things that the council can do independent of a parish president, but it's going to be an awkward situation.
How many more years left to Mike Gainey's term?
I think he's got about 3 years left.
Okay. All right, thanks a lot, Errol. We're going to go over to Gordon right now and talk about someone who has stepped down. He resigned and then he was fired, and that's U.S. Attorney Kenneth Polite, and he was caught up, with this whole purge by the Trump administration.
Right, kind of a sort of amusing turn of events, I guess. Kenneth Polite was an appointee of President Obama, was planning to step down. As most U.S. attorneys, they inevitably step down. Almost all of them, there's 93 around the country, and they typically step down at some point after the new president comes into office. He had sent out a message saying he intended to resign in 2 weeks, and then it so happened that very day, the Trump administration decided it wanted all the holdover attorneys to be gone that day. There were 46 of them, I think. So his 2-week sort of glide path turned into a several-hour glide path. But just to be clear, it's not unusual for there to be a purge of U.S. attorneys. It's a little bit unusual for it to happen suddenly without warning, and that it took Ken Polite a little bit by surprise.
And then everybody on the same day. I don't recall that.
Yeah, I think actually that the Clinton administration did something sort of similar, but they gave people like 5 days, but there was a general purge in that administration. I think before that, the typical practice was that the U.S. attorney would stay in place until the new U.S. attorney had been nominated and confirmed.
So, what goes on now at the U.S. Attorney's Office without Kenneth Polite, and then also any sort of cases, perhaps, that he was spearheading?
Well, so I don't think it causes a huge change in things. I mean, he had a first assistant, Dwayne Evans, who becomes the acting U.S. attorney, and typically I think the U.S. attorney himself isn't really the guy who's filing motions and that sort of thing. He's more like a quarterback or a leader who is briefed on important investigations, and I think the office can run fairly well in his absence. I mean, another thing that U.S. attorneys do is they're allowed to enact sort of a vision for their office, which of course has to be in tune with the vision of the Justice Department. Right. So you have the Attorney General kind of laying out a vision, and then each U.S. attorney has a little bit of flexibility within that. What
would you say was the focus and the legacy of Kenneth Polite's term?
I mean, I think clearly what he did differently than his predecessor, Jim Letton, who was in the office for 11 years, Ken Polite made a real focus of going after violent crime, and particularly these violent gangs. And they had a number of very complex trials in which there were numerous defendants, 10 or 12 defendants. The recent 39ers trial was the last one, people accused of a range of things, selling drugs and killing people and shooting people and so forth. And they were pretty successful in those prosecutions, which I think took up a lot of the office's resources. I think Ken Polite's critics would say, a lot of people like Jim Letton's focus on corruption. He put a lot of public officials in jail, I think somewhere around 20, and that slacked off a little bit during Polite's term, which of course was much shorter. But you could also, we haven't heard reports that the office was refusing a lot of those cases. It's not, it could be that, corruption goes through natural ebbs and flows as well, I'm sure.
So replacement.
Replacement, yeah. There's a lot of names out there. There's 6 that we've heard in particular, and I'm not in any particular order. There's 4 former assistant U.S. attorneys. 4 former federal prosecutors: Peter Thompson, Peter Strasser, Eads Hogue, and Brian Capitelli. There's a guy who works in the office currently, James Baer, who's a federal prosecutor, and then former Jefferson Parish President John Young has been mentioned as a possible candidate.
So it's up to our senators, though, to recommend.
Pretty much
right?
up to the 2 senators, yeah.
And it takes a while to usually.
It can take a while, yeah. And the Trump administration has been a little, fairly slow in filling out its appointments, so I'd expect it to take a while.
presidents ask for the advice of senators, but it doesn't mean they have to follow.
That's
it's not
correct. I mean,
automatic.
I think
it's really the president's decision.
That's correct. I mean, I think pretty much always it's fallen to the senators or the sort of leading members of the party within the state, but that doesn't mean Donald Trump couldn't take a different tack.
And for Ken Polite, no run for mayor, so he says right now.
Right, he had been touted as a possible candidate, and he took his name out of the running this week.
All right, thanks a lot, Gordon. Going to go over to Kurt right now, and there was another multiple shooting in Jefferson Parish. This is the third incident of multiple homicides since the beginning of this year, which is a real concern, obviously.
And I think we've had some other very high-profile cases as well in Jefferson Parish. And, you know, let's look at how the parish ended 2016. The parish had a significant drop in overall crime, but a big jump in murders. And sure, people have an ear for the overall drop in crime, but, you know, murders is kind of the one that everybody's judged by. You know, that's the measuring stick for everyone. And at this case, at this point, I believe we've got 11 murder cases so far in JP this year. And that would put us on track for about 54 for the year. Last year it was 43, and that was a big jump. So right now we're on pace to even have more murders in Jefferson Parish. You mentioned we had the 4 people killed at the apartment building this week. Last month we had the West Wego officer and the woman who were shot and killed. We had the 3 people who were found shot in the car. We had the attack on Oaklawn, where we had 4 arrests. And 3 of them are family members, a father and his 2 sons. The sheriff was just almost apoplectic about that. And we've had we had the Shell station attack, just where the woman the clerk was there. And it was, if you ask the sheriff, he'll tell you, if you see the surveillance video of that, it's unimaginable how the woman even survived it. But we've got arrests in all the cases, except for the most recent 4 people who were killed. And so the sheriff's office, you know, the sheriff will tell you that this is cyclical. The crime is cyclical. He'll tell you, especially like in the case on the Oaklawn shooting, where he feels like the people who are responsible for that cannot be rehabilitated. He thinks they simply just need to be locked up for a long time. So I think a big part of his message is, look, we're making arrests, we're clearing the cases. Some of these might be drug related, so it's not like, of course, you've got the convenience store case, but so many of the cases are not random.
And then one of the cases, the main cases which involved the death of the police officer, that was a domestic incident.
Exactly. Again, and not a random thing where somebody could be walking down the street and just, you know, randomly become a crime victim. I think what's interesting also that the sheriff is making a point of telling people is he wants to help spread this message that, yeah, we're locking people up. So if you're going to do this, you're going to go to jail. You're going to go to jail for a long time. That's what he wants to happen to this father and his 2 sons. And he says just recently the department had a new director begin work who is in charge of social media, who is in charge of the Facebook and the Twitter and all that kind of stuff that the sheriff is not on, but he has someone who's in charge of it because that is where messages are being received by so many people, especially young people, and that's where he's telling people, hey, we're arresting all these people.
Okay. All right, Kurt, thanks a lot. We're going to go over to Richard right now. And there had been an announcement, about a couple of years ago regarding development along the convention center, which had been earmarked originally for the expansion of the convention center, but that sort of fell through, and so there was plans for a hotel and retail, but that's been stalled.
That's right. So for about 2 years now, the Convention Center Board has been negotiating with a group of prominent local developers, including Daryl Berger, Joe Yeager, as well as the Howard Hughes Corp., which owns the riverfront property, about developing this 47-acre tract that the Convention Center owns that they bought more than a decade ago, at one time when they thought that that could be an expansion for the Convention Center itself. And after Katrina, it didn't seem like that was really necessary anymore. And so they've looked at trying to develop this to include a high-rise hotel, perhaps 1,000, 1,200 rooms, as well as entertainment complex, restaurants, maybe some apartments, to try to have, you know, a prime hotel for conventions as they come in, a place that's right there, close and central to everything. And they say that this is really necessary for a couple of reasons. One is to try to be able to compete with some of these other cities for the convention business. And also, if you look just a few weeks ago when we had the 2 weekends of Carnival, we had the NBA All-Star Game, we had a citywide convention in town, there really seems to be a need for more rooms downtown to be able to accommodate all of these things as they're happening at once.
And there are other smaller hotel projects on the books already, so we still need that one big hotel, is what they're saying, too.
There's been a whole rash of hotel projects in and around the CBD in recent years. There's about 4,000 rooms right now that are within the pipeline. And the view among some people in the hospitality industry is that we could still use another 4,000 or
Look at
so.
all the delays there have been to the Four Seasons project with the World Trade Center. And that could really just be a centerpiece of the riverfront development if ever that man allows it to happen.
So this development that you're talking about along the convention center, along the riverfront, while it's not moving along as quickly as the board would like to see it, they haven't given up on it yet.
They haven't given up on it yet. It's been about 2 years of negotiation. It could be a potentially $1.5 billion public-private partnership. And there's a couple of complications along the way, they say. One is there's a lot of agencies involved. There's the port, there's the city, there's the state, and there's also the developers naturally in the convention center, and just the sheer magnitude of how much money is involved. That everybody wants to try to get comfortable with. The Convention Center Board has had a few distractions, a few other challenges come up in the last few years between funding the mayor's security plan. They've also bought the former Artworks building over in the warehouse district just in the last 6 months. But they had thought by mid last year they'd have this wrapped up, or at least the negotiation moving forward to a point that they could go with it by the end of the year, and they're obviously not there.
When do they call it and say, okay, we move on to something else? Do they know?
That's the question. They'd said by the end of last year, and now they're kind of stringing it along a little bit to see where else it can go. The project that's moving along right now is about an $85 million effort to kind of make Convention Center Boulevard more pedestrian-friendly, and that should break ground by the summer. And they say if by then there's nothing in place, then they can go back to the drawing board.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Over to Garden real quick. And the legislature is going to start its regular session, and they are tackling some money-saving measures in various ways.
Yeah, as everyone knows, Louisiana's fiscal condition is always pretty precarious, and it's especially precarious this year. And the session will begin in about a month. Couple big picture things. They're supposed to be taking on ambitious tax reform, although we'll see if they really do that. There's a bunch of plans on the table, which are being unveiled sort of on a daily basis. One that we wrote about recently is a plan to change the way that businesses are taxed so that instead of their income being taxed, their sales would be taxed. And the governor says this would bring in more money and that it would be more fair. There's already some opposition arising to this in
That's
part.
based on an Ohio model, so it's used elsewhere.
That's right. And I mean, I think part of this is going to raise more money, so obviously somebody's ox is going to get gored. They want to add some services, sales taxes to some services that aren't currently taxed as well, which I'm sure won't be popular. So that's happening on one track. They're talking about, they're going to look at all the tax incentive programs that we've talked about for years, including the film program, which has been kind of sort of shut down almost for a while because of the changes the legislature made a couple of years ago. There's been some activity picking up again recently, but I think the film industry is now prepared to live with a cap of $180 million or so, but they'd like to sort of change the program so that it's a little more, that they reach that cap each year.
And incarceration rates. I mean, that's really a big focus of the governor's.
Right. Yes, and that's sort of partly fiscal and partly just, sort of more of a social or humanistic kind of change. But the idea is to lower our incarceration rate, which is the highest in the country by far. And they've got a package of like 20 measures that would do this in various ways. Some of it is running into some static from the district attorneys in particular, who are very politically powerful. The part that seems to be the most controversial is talk of letting certain people be eligible for parole at some point, people who are now doing life without parole. but the corrections officials say this is needed, and a lot of these people really aren't a threat to society, and so it's really a question of how much they need to be punished versus it's not so much that they're afraid that these people are going to commit new crimes, but maybe after 20 or 25 years they could be let go and nobody would be hurt.
They say the focus should be on violent offenders, keep the beds open for that. But the task force that released a report,
yes.
They project that, about $300 million will be saved over a decade?
Yeah, over 20 years, I believe.
20 years.
So it's substantial money. I mean, they want to reinvest some of that money into actually helping the offenders become better functioning members of society when they get out of prison. So you wouldn't actually see all that savings put back into other things, but they think that Louisiana would be a better functioning place with these reforms, and that we wouldn't have this sort of unwanted title of being the most incarcerating place in the world.
So these are big issues that the legislature is going to be facing and they have to
Yes.
tackle with. All right, and we'll be talking more about all of that, I'm sure. Thanks, Gordon. Back over to Richard real quick now. Looking at real estate prices, we're seeing a sizzling hot market in Orleans, maybe starting to cool off a little bit.
It looks like in the last 6 months of the year, it is finally starting to cool off a little bit. We saw prices increase a little bit under 3% versus about 14% a year over year from 2014 to 2015. And a lot of that at that time was driven by a real pent-up demand and a lack of available units, particularly in some of the desirable markets in the Irish Channel, going down that sliver by the river through the CBD into the French Quarter. And we're still seeing a lot of growth there. If you look at the last 6 months, that area prices rose by about 32%. That saw the largest gangs across the city. And by the square foot, it was about twice as much as what you saw in Orleans overall, which was about $177.
And how are the burbs doing?
Well, looking across the burbs, overall in the metro area, we saw about 5%, including Orleans. Outside of Orleans, the biggest gangs were in St. Bernard, where prices rose about 14% year over year. A lot of that was driven by interest in Araby, I think. Folks that maybe are getting priced out of that section of Orleans are crossing the parish line and heading over there.
And what about in JP, Jefferson Parish, St. Charles, St. Tammany?
And we're seeing people look to that area. They want maybe a little more property. It's a modern housing stock in Jefferson Parish and St. Tammany. By the square foot, prices are about $115, $117 there versus $177 in Orleans. So it's an obvious choice. I mean, you're paying to live in that city center where, you know, that's what you want to desire to, that's where you want to go. It's going to cost you.
So are realtors saying that they're sort of seeing an evolution in desires too of the population that's enjoyed this center city living, now maybe having a family and wanting to go out to where the grass is actually there?
That's certainly it. I mean, a lot of this too at the center's living, kind of that sliver area in the last couple of years has also been driven by second home buyers, folks coming from out of town that want a spot there. The millennials, my people, that would kind of want to be in Orleans, don't want to quite go out to the suburbs yet. And so they have that option, but it's going to cost them.
Okay. All right, Richard. We'll just keep on track with that. Right now, we're going to go on over to Kurt. And the plan to make Bourbon Street safer has already gone through some modification. And there's also some talking of rebranding Bourbon Street. Is that possible?
Right. Well, it's named Bourbon Street, but we might as well call it Bread and Butter Street because it has so much to do with the economy and the identity of the area here. And yeah, the mayor is pitching a $40 million plan to keep it safe with things like crime cameras, license plate reading cameras, the bollards or the roadblocks that you see to create a pedestrian mall there during certain hours, enhanced lighting. He initially asked the bars to close their doors, not close for business, but close their doors at 3 in the morning. So that was plan A. Then, in true New Orleans fashion, the negotiations begin. The mayor has since backed off having to require the bars to close their doors at 3 in the morning, saying that there are issues with fire hazard and safety issues. And the bars were saying, look, we got smokers. What kind of message does that send to them? But there's also talk of now, bringing in benches and big pots for plants and things like that along in the area. And there are people who say, look, this was the French Quarter is a neighborhood, but there's also concerns that this is going to create just this pedestrian mall. People are pushing back. They don't mind. I don't think there's a whole lot of fight, at least among the people who live there, of getting rid of, or not getting rid of preventing any new adult businesses from getting to Bourbon Street. But there's also the flip side of it is, and that is if Mardi Gras night when you're on the Royal Sonesta New Orleans, you got that camera shot down Bourbon Street. How many of the people that you see, that sea of people, are worried about whether they've got benches on Bourbon Street? Is that what they came here for? So we've seen a real change, I think, over the past 30 years or so in what Bourbon Street is.
Actually, Mardi Gras night's the one night they clear everybody out at midnight. The police, it's very successful. What was a success was what happened under the Rudy Giuliani administration with Times Square in New York. The Times Square really gotten fairly sleazy, and they just cleaned it up. And it still made it kind of an interesting pedestrian kind of place to be. But the other thing about Bourbon Street, the two really horrible incidents over the last few years where people were shot, of course, got national attention. As I recall, the number of shooters in those two incidents was maybe like 2 or 3 people. Like one was one person, okay, and the other was 2 people shooting at each other. And so it's not like it's a big gang warfare going on. I mean, it's 2 people who just kind of lost control amidst thousands and thousands of people. I mean, so statistically, Bourbon Street is very safe.
There's not a lot of violent crime. There's just been a couple of high-profile incidents. That's right.
So is there any talk about bringing even more music back to Bourbon Street?
Right, well, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. There was a talk about a music requirement as well. And if you recall, back in the 90s, I believe it was Suzanne Hike Terrell or some of the other people who were really pushing to get the city to be known more. I mean, you think, well, we're known for jazz. What else could we?
Right.
How can we be known more for music? But you've got cities like Austin that are calling themselves the live music capital. And I think there are some people who feel like that has been usurped in a way from New Orleans.
And this talk in sort of changing the culture of Bourbon Street, how would that? Would the planters do it in the benches?
That's a great question. Is that really going to do it? Is that going to change conduct? Is that going to change who comes to town? How about this? The Music and Culture Coalition of New Orleans. Have you heard about this? They're asking for suggestions for a good visitor's guide, so that we can tell visitors how they should behave. You can go online and make your suggestions on what we can tell the people when they show up here how to behave.
I think they come with some anyway, with an anticipation of how they're going to behave.
But the thing is, if you look at that camera shot down Bourbon Street at noon and then at midnight, do they have different expectations?
Well, part of the secret that works on Mardi Gras night is to keep the crowd moving. They can stay there as long as they want, but they can't loiter. So as long as there's reason just to keep on moving along, that helps.
Plus the horses.
Right.
The horses
That'll
help with that
definitely
too,
keep
absolutely.
you. Okay, we got to look ahead. Errol.
Well, today is St. Patrick's Day. The day after tomorrow is St. Joseph's Day. Tomorrow is the day before St. Joseph's Day. It's to me one of the great cultural celebrations in New Orleans. That's the St. Joseph's Altars. And it's something that started in Sicily. But believe me, it's New Orleans that preserves this tradition more than Sicily does. That New Orleans is really sort of like the global epicenter for preserving their tradition. So visit some altars tomorrow and help preserve something that's really culturally important.
And find some wonderful food, too. Gordon.
Well, I think we're about to see the mayor's race crank up in earnest now that Mardi Gras is behind us, and we'll have a look at that in Sunday's Advocate. I think you might see J.P. Morrell get into the race. We'll see.
Okay.
For the first time since last March's floods, the Monk Run returns to St. Joseph Abbey just north of Covington.
Okay, very good. Richard.
I've been reading a lot this week about the Saints are trying to woo Super Bowl hero Malcolm Butler.
Mm-hmm. We heard about that.
I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to stay in New England. That's my prediction right here.
You do really good to come here. It's a very nice place to live. It's definitely a lot
I agree,
warmer.
But...
Okay, all
How
right,
did the
we'll
Patriots
see.
do last season?
Very well.
They did?
Very well.
As Richard will be quick to tell you.
Yeah, so
Okay.
strong.
Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful St. Pat's Day, and we'll see you again next week from Informed Sources. Have a good evening.